Imagine that you're part of the royal family of a small island nation, and a bigger kingdom comes in, takes you over, kills your family. You manage to escape, but now you have a mission: infiltrate their ranks and take them down. The book we're talking about today is The Will of the Many by James Islington. Hello, book people. I am P.T. Hylton. I'm the author of the Zane Halloway series and other books. Today I want to talk about The Will of Many. This is a book that has had a lot of buzz on it, especially here on YouTube. For some reason, folks are really into this book, and it came out earlier this year. I've been meaning to check it out, and I'm really glad that I did. So this novel revolves around a protagonist named Viz, not his real name, who, as I kind of alluded to in the intro, was part of the royal family of a smaller island nation, and is taken over by this nation that is kind of very much Roman Empire inspired. And they kill his family. He runs away, goes into hiding, but then several years later he gets his shot at revenge when a noble in this society offers to adopt him and send him to the school that the elites go to. That's as much as I'll reveal about the plot. There's a lot of really interesting and really cool stuff going on with this story. The first thing that's really interesting about it is the sort of magic system, if you can even call it that, within this fantasy world. So the main kind of empire is called the hierarchy, and they are a very, true to their name, hierarchical society. The way it works is that the lowest people cede half of their will, which is sort of their strength, their intelligence, their willpower, everything like that, to a person above them. So the people at the very lowest part of society are kind of very lethargic, stumbling around a little bit like that. But then, if you're one of the next level up, you've got 8 of these people ceding half of their will to you. So you're, 9 times as much will as the normal person, but you have to cede half of that to the person above you. So it's only 4.5 times, and so on and so on. So it's kind of this pyramid scheme of power where everybody is kind of ceding to the higher ups, and the higher up the pyramid you get, the more inhumanly strong and powerful that the people are. So it's a really cool idea, unique sort of magic system that I've never seen before, for one, and for another, it's a perfect setup for a character who wants to go against this empire, right? Because the higher he's going, the further up the food chain he's trying to defy, the tougher these people are going to be. And we get a pretty good sense early on in kind of a gladiatorial style scene where he's in this kind of fighting ring, and he's fighting people that are just a level or two above him, and they are just way stronger. The second thing that makes this a little bit interesting as a modern adult fantasy novel is that it is written in the first person and in the present tense, which, I tend to associate more with YA novels and things like that. And you could, from that information and from the fact that a lot of this takes place at kind of a magical school, or a school, I don't think you'd call it a magical school, but a school where there is some magical things happening, you might assume this is a YA novel, but it really is not. There's something about it that's very adult. Some brutal adult type things happen, and especially towards the end of the book, there's a lot going on here. The prose is beautiful. James Islington does an amazing job. He's a great writer, man. He really is. And the whole book just feels like a very serious, dire situation, one after another. And probably the thing this book does best that adds to that tension is kind of the politics and the different layers of deception that are going on. On the one level, you have your main character Viz, who doesn't want anyone to know that he's actually the prince of this other nation that's been taken away, which is a cool setup for a story, by the way. A lot of times in fantasy, you have a really low, village person from a village who's working their way up. In this case, you've got a former prince who's been knocked way down in society, but he spent his whole life up until that point training as a prince, so he has a lot of knowledge, a lot of combat training, a lot of training in thinking and history and logic and things like that people don't expect he's going to have, since they just consider him this orphan. So that is very cool. But he doesn't want people to know about this, of course, and then his adoptive father has secrets that are going on, and then when he gets to this school, other people have secrets. There's more secrets, and so he's working with this person, but doesn't want them to know this 3/4 of his story. But then this other person he's working with, he can tell them this thing, but not this other thing. Or the first person will get it. It's really interesting, the layers and layers and layers of deception, and it just really adds to the tension and keeps this book moving very quickly. The other thing I'll say about this book is that it plays with so many very familiar tropes. Everything from kind of the gladiatorial style fighting tournament thing that I mentioned before is very familiar. Of course, the magical school stuff is very familiar. Some of like the contest type stuff they do in the magical school is kind of familiar. But at the same time, none of it feels stale. It all feels very fresh. And I think the two aspects that make it that way are, one, this idea of the seeding, the way that the will power works, and then second of all, those layers of deception I mentioned. But then third of all, and I don't think I mentioned this before, one of the main character's main characteristics is that he is the one person in society who wants nothing to do with this will seeding kind of pyramid scheme thing. Everyone else is wanting to get in on it, to get up to the next level of it, to figure out what's the best position they can get on it. And he is just, doesn't want a part of it. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a lot of progression fantasy novels that I've been reading this year. But at the same time, it's almost in some ways an anti-progression fantasy, and that he is kind of rejecting this whole system that he is a part of, even though he is growing and progressing in different ways, but it's just not part of this will system. The final thing I'll say is just that this book has a doozy of an ending. Of course, I'm not even going to imply anything about it other than to say is very interesting, very, very cool, and it makes me very excited for the next book, which I believe is coming out in 2025. This book is I like this book enough that the second in the series is like my second most anticipated book of next year now. The first one being, of course, The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, probably my favorite current fantasy author. But, the second book in this Hierarchy series is very close to that on my most anticipated list. So that is The Will of the Many. If you've read it, I would love to hear what you think about it. If you'd like to see more of these types of reviews of fantasy, crime, and horror novels, please subscribe below. I'd love to have you back. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep turning pages.